My name is Adela Parker, 32, and my husband James left me for his pregnant mistress, Valerie. She is the one, he declared proudly. We are having a baby. He had no idea I had been investigating his betrayal. At our final family dinner, while James toasted to his new life, I silently placed DNA test results on the table. The baby wasn't his. It was his brother Michael's child. The room fell completely silent. If you are watching this from anywhere in the world, hit like and subscribe to hear how my cheating husband's perfect new life fell apart in one shocking moment. I met James Westbrook at my college friend Sophia's wedding 5 years ago. I was 32 at the time, freshly relocated to Chicago from Portland, where I had built a modest reputation as an interior designer. The move had been my fresh start after ending a toxic 4-year relationship with my ex-boyfriend, who had repeatedly postponed our engagement, always finding new excuses. Chicago represented new possibilities both professionally and personally. The wedding reception was held at the magnificent Drake Hotel, and I remember feeling slightly out of place among the Chicago elite that made up most of the guest list. Sophia had married into a wealthy family, and the event was nothing short of spectacular. I was admiring the ornate ceiling of the grand ballroom when a deep voice beside me said, "Miss." The ceiling mouldings are original from 1920. Quite impressive craftsmanship, right? I turned to see an incredibly handsome man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He had dark brown hair, styled impeccably warm hazel eyes, and a confident smile that immediately put me at ease. This was James, the marketing executive who would later become my husband. I was just thinking the same thing, I replied. I would love to integrate that kind of detailed craftsmanship into modern designs. His eyes lit up. You are a designer. From that moment, our conversation flowed effortlessly. James was intelligent, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in my work and perspectives. By the end of the night, we had barely left each other's side, and I felt that unmistakable flutter of excitement about the possibilities. James came from a prominent Chicago family. His father, William Westbrook, had built a successful investment firm that James was expected to join before he rebelled and went into marketing instead. His mother, Eleanor, was a socialite who organized charity events and maintained their family's social connections. They lived in a lakeside estate in Highland Park that had been in the family for generations. Then there was Michael, James's younger brother by 3 years. From the way James described him, I could tell there was a complicated dynamic between them. Michael was the family rebel choosing to become a wildlife photographer, rather than pursuing the business or law career his parents had hoped for. He traveled frequently for his work documenting endangered species around the world for major environmental publications. Michael has always done whatever he wants with little regard for family expectations, James told me during our third date. I admire his freedom in some ways, but his choices have not always been practical. I would later understand that the family viewed James as the responsible, successful son, while Michael was seen as the unpredictable, creative one, despite his growing success in his field. This dynamic would prove to be significant in ways I could never have imagined at the time. Our courtship was a whirlwind. James took me to the finest restaurants in Chicago, surprised me with weekend getaways to Michigan wine country, and made me feel valued in a way my previous relationship never had. Within 6 months, he proposed during a private sunset cruise on Lake Michigan. The ring was a family heirloom, a stunning 3-carat diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. We married the following spring at the Westbrook family estate. The ceremony was held overlooking the lake, with white roses everywhere, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. It was like something from a fairy tale, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found such a perfect partner. I met Michael for the first time at our rehearsal dinner. He had just returned from an assignment in Borneo and looked somewhat out of place among the polished Chicago elite in his slightly rumpled suit. Despite his obvious physical resemblance to James, Michael had a more relaxed demeanor and an intensity in his eyes that suggested he observed the world differently than his brother. "So you are the woman who finally captured my brother's heart," Michael said when James introduced us. "He says you are incredibly talented." "He exaggerates," I replied modestly. "I doubt that," Michael said with a genuine smile. James has always had excellent taste. The first years of our marriage were blissful. We purchased a beautiful brownstone in Lincoln Park and renovated it together. My interior design business began to flourish as James connected me with his affluent colleagues who needed their homes redesigned. He was supportive of my career, proud of my successes, and we seemed to be true partners in every sense. After 3 years of marriage, we decided to start trying for a baby. We both wanted children, and it seemed like the perfect time. I was established in my business, and James had just received a significant promotion to Vice President of Client Relations at his firm. We converted one of our guest rooms into a future nursery, and I began sketching designs for it, imagining the life growing within those walls. But month after month, my period arrived with devastating punctuality. After 6 months of trying, I suggested we both get checked to make sure everything was okay. James agreed, though he seemed confident the issue was not with him. Westbrook men are known for their fertility, he said with his characteristic confidence. My father has 4 brothers and his father had 5. The first signs of trouble in our marriage coincided with our difficulty conceiving. James began working later hours, claiming his new position required more client dinners and networking events. I believed him, of course. Why would I not? He had never given me reason to doubt him before. My doctor found nothing physically wrong with me, but suggested that stress might be affecting my ability to conceive. She recommended tracking my ovulation more carefully and considering lifestyle changes to reduce stress. James's test results came back normal as well, but he seemed less interested in our scheduled attempts to conceive as time went on. Maybe we are trying too hard, he suggested one night after I explained that I was ovulating. It will happen when it happens. Making it so clinical takes the fun out of it. I tried not to let my disappointment show, but I wondered if he truly understood how important this was to me. As we approached the 1-year mark of trying to conceive, I began to notice other small changes in James. He checked his phone more frequently when we were together. He took calls in another room. And most concerning, he had stopped looking me in the eyes when he told me he loved me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of trying to conceive was making me oversensitive. But deep down, I knew something had shifted in our perfect marriage. By our 4th wedding anniversary, James and I were sleeping in the same bed, but living increasingly separate lives. My fertility journey had become a lonely one, with James skipping more doctor's appointments than he attended. I trust you to handle this, he would say. You know how crazy work is right now. His marketing firm had landed several major new clients, which legitimately kept him busy. But I could not help noticing that his work emergencies often occurred on evenings, when I had scheduled romantic dinners, or on the weekends when I was most likely to be ovulating. It was around this time that Valerie Turner entered our lives, though I would not realize her significance until much later. James mentioned hiring her as a new marketing coordinator fresh out of graduate school from Northwestern. She has incredible potential, he said with unusual enthusiasm during one of our increasingly rare dinners together. Very creative thinking, ambitious. She reminds me a little of myself when I was starting out. I was genuinely happy that James had found a promising team member. His position involved mentoring younger staff, and he had always taken pride in developing talent. That is great, I replied. Maybe we could have her over for dinner sometime with the rest of your team. James looked momentarily uncomfortable. Maybe in a few months. I do not want to blur professional lines too quickly. The first time I met Valerie was at James's company holiday party. She was stunning in a fitted red dress that highlighted her slender figure with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. At 27, she had the kind of effortless beauty that made me suddenly conscious of the fine lines beginning to form around my own eyes. Adela, I have heard so much about you, she gushed when James introduced us. Your design work is amazing. James showed me the spread of your River North Loft project in Chicago Home magazine. Thank you. I replied, genuinely flattered that James had been sharing my work with his colleagues. That project was particularly challenging because of the space constraints. I would love to pick your brain sometime about design, Valerie continued. I just moved into a new apartment and it is a complete blank slate. James placed his hand on the small of Valerie's back in a gesture that seemed slightly too familiar. Valerie has an excellent eye for aesthetics. She completely reworked our presentation templates, made them much more contemporary. I noticed how his eyes lingered on her a beat too long, how his smile seemed more genuine than it had been with me in months. A small alarm bell rang in the back of my mind, but I silenced it. James was simply being a supportive mentor. I was letting my insecurities about not being able to conceive affect my thinking. As the weeks passed, James mentioned Valerie with increasing frequency. They were working closely on a major campaign for a new client. She had innovative ideas that were impressing the senior partners. He was taking her along to client meetings to give her exposure to the business development side. Meanwhile, my visits to fertility specialists continued. Each negative pregnancy test felt like a personal failure, and James's decreasing interest in the process only compounded my sense of inadequacy. "Maybe we should take a break from all this," he suggested after I tearfully reported yet another negative result. "It is clearly stressing you out, and that cannot be helping." The first concrete evidence that something was wrong came when I found receipts for restaurants I had never been to, with James' charges for weekend nights when he had claimed to be working late at the office. There was a charge for a hotel bar downtown on a night he had texted me he was too tired to come home and was sleeping on the office couch. When I confronted him, he had ready explanations for everything. The restaurant charges were client dinners. The hotel bar was for drinks after a marketing conference that ran late. His explanations were plausible, and he seemed offended that I would question him. "Do you not trust me?" he asked, his voice tinged with hurt. "After everything we have built together?" "Of course I trust you," I assured him, feeling guilty for my suspicions. "I just miss you. You are away so much lately." He pulled me into a hug that felt mechanical. "This busy period will not last forever. Once we land the Meridian account, things will calm down." But things did not calm down. Our 5th anniversary dinner was a disaster. James was distracted the entire time, checking his phone repeatedly and barely engaging in conversation. Halfway through the main course, he received a text that made him frown. "I am so sorry, but there is an emergency with the Meridian presentation. Numbers in the projection slides are wrong and the meeting is first thing tomorrow." "Can someone else fix it?" I asked, not bothering to hide my disappointment. "I need to handle this personally," he insisted. "I will make it up to you this weekend, I promise." He did not make it up to me that weekend or any weekend after. I began seeing a therapist to deal with my growing depression. Dr. Marshall helped me see that my self-worth was not tied to my ability to conceive, but she also gently suggested that there might be other issues in my marriage that needed addressing. "Have you considered that James might be distancing himself for reasons unrelated to your fertility struggles?" she asked during one session. I had considered it, of course, but admitting my suspicions out loud felt like betrayal. "He has been under a lot of pressure at work," I said defensively. "And that explains his emotional withdrawal," Dr. Marshall asked kindly. I had no good answer for that. The truth was, James had become increasingly critical of me in recent months. My cooking was too bland. My clothes were too casual. Why did I not make more of an effort like I used to? Each criticism chipped away at my confidence, making me wonder if his distance was somehow my fault. Looking back, I can see he was creating justifications for his behavior, finding flaws in me to excuse his own betrayal. But at the time, I only tried harder to be what he seemed to want, even as he moved further away. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in April. I had been scheduled to visit a client site in Milwaukee, but the meeting was cancelled at the last minute due to a plumbing emergency that flooded the space. Instead of notifying James, I decided to surprise him by coming home early and preparing a special dinner. Our brownstone was quiet when I entered. I called out for James, but there was no answer. He was still at work, of course. I headed upstairs to change out of my business attire, already planning the menu for our impromptu date night. As I was hanging up my blazer in our walk-in closet, something caught my eye on the floor near James's side of the bed. A small pearl earring that definitely was not mine. I stared at it, trying to formulate innocent explanations. A client who had visited our home. A piece of jewelry that had been caught in James's clothing from an innocent interaction, but I knew. In that moment, all the small doubts and inconsistencies of the past months crystallized into a terrible certainty. I searched the bedroom more thoroughly and found the matching earring between the mattress and headboard. I sat on the edge of the bed, the pair of earrings in my palm, and waited. For 3 hours I rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm and dignified when confronting my husband. By the time I heard his key in the front door, my initial shock had hardened into cold resolve. "Adela, what are you doing sitting in the dark?" James called as he entered our bedroom. He smelled faintly of an unfamiliar perfume. Without a word, I opened my hand, revealing the pearl earrings. The colour drained from his face. "I can explain, mate," he began, but his voice lacked conviction. "Please do." I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. What followed was a painful dance of denial, minimization, and finally partial confession. Yes, he admitted he had been having an affair. Yes, it was with Valerie, but it was just physical, he insisted. It did not mean anything. He had been under tremendous pressure at work. He had felt neglected due to my fixation on getting pregnant. "I made a mistake," he said, kneeling before me and taking my hands in his. "It is over now, I promise. We can work through this." I wanted to believe him. Despite the betrayal, I still loved the man I had married, or at least the man I thought I had married. We agreed to try couples counselling. James promised to cut all non-essential contact with Valerie, keeping their interactions strictly professional and in group settings only. For a few weeks, he seemed genuinely committed to repairing our marriage. He came home on time. He attended counselling sessions with me. He was attentive and remorseful, but gradually the old patterns returned. He was late for therapy appointments or cancelled at the last minute. Work emergencies multiplied. The distance between us grew again. In a last desperate attempt to save our marriage, I planned a weekend getaway to a lakeside cabin in Dorr County. Just the two of us, away from work pressures and fertility charts and the ghost of his affair. James initially seemed enthusiastic about the idea. 2 days before we were set to leave, he called from work. "I am so sorry, but I cannot go this weekend. The Meridian account is in trouble and I need to put together a rescue presentation." Something in his voice triggered my suspicion. After we hung up, I checked his location on our shared family app, a feature we had set up years ago for safety. His phone showed him at his office downtown, but an hour later, when he should have been working on his crucial presentation, his location changed to a residential building in River North, an upscale area where we had no friends or family. Acting on an impulse I had never experienced before, I got in my car and drove to the address. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like a character in a movie I never wanted to star in. At 9:45 p.m, James emerged from the building with Valerie. They were not behaving like colleagues or even like people having a casual affair. He had his arm around her waist. She leaned into him with the comfortable intimacy of an established relationship. Before they parted at her car, he kissed her in a way he had not kissed me in months, perhaps years. I drove home in a daze, my mind strangely calm. The Dorr County cabin deposit was non-refundable. It seemed like such a trivial detail to fixate on, but somehow it represented all the wasted investments I had made in this marriage. When James came home around midnight, I pretended to be asleep. What was there to say that had not already been said? The next morning, I called Dr. Marshall and scheduled an emergency session. I needed to figure out my next steps with professional guidance. "It sounds like you have a decision to make," she said after I recounted what I had seen. "I think James has already made the decision," I replied. "He just has not told me yet." For 3 weeks, James and I lived like polite strangers sharing the same address. He slept in the guest room, claiming he did not want to disturb me with his late hours. I focused on my design business, taking on new clients to keep myself busy and to ensure my financial independence. We barely spoke beyond the necessities of cohabitation. I was in my home office reviewing fabric samples when James finally decided to end the charade. He knocked on the doorframe, his expression serious, but with an undercurrent of what looked like relief. "Do you have a minute to talk?" he asked. I nodded, already knowing what was coming. James sat down across from my desk, not beside me, on the small sofa where a husband might normally sit to speak with his wife. "I have been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his tone formal as if addressing a business associate. "About us, about our future." "And first," I prompted when he paused. "I think we both know things have not been right between us for a long time," he continued. "We want different things. We have grown apart." I said nothing, forcing him to actually say the words. "I want a divorce, Adela." Despite expecting it, the finality of the statement hit me like a physical blow. 5 years of marriage dismissed in 4 words. "Is there someone else?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. James had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Yes," he admitted. "Valerie and I have become involved and it has become serious." "How serious?" He hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "She is pregnant, about 12 weeks along." The room seemed to tilt around me. All our years of trying all the negative pregnancy tests, all the fertility appointments he had missed, and now his affair partner was pregnant after a few months. "She is pregnant," I repeated numbly. "Yes," James said, and I detected a note of pride in his voice. It was unexpected, but sometimes life has other plans. "Clearly. I know this is a shock, but in a way maybe it is for the best," he continued, gaining confidence as he spoke. "Valerie is the one for me, Adela. I believe that now. What happened between us was not just an affair. We connected on a level I have not experienced before. Each word was a fresh cut. Not only was he leaving me, but he was retroactively rewriting our entire relationship to justify his choices. And the baby?" I managed to ask. His face softened, genuine emotion breaking through his businesslike demeanor. "I am going to be a father. After all this time, it is finally happening. I know the circumstances are not ideal, but I cannot help but see this as fate." Fate, I echoed hollowly. I am sorry it happened this way, he said, though his expression did not match his words. But Valerie could give me what you could not. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. He was blaming me for our inability to conceive, making it the justification for his betrayal. I will have my lawyer contact yours, he said, rising from the chair. I want to be fair about the division of assets. I know this house means a lot to you. I just stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. I will be moving out tomorrow, he added. I am staying with Valerie while we look for a place together. After he left my office, I sat motionless for hours. The fabric samples blurred before my eyes as tears finally came. Not just for the end of my marriage, but for the death of the future I had imagined for us, the family we would never have. James moved out the next day while I was at a client meeting, a cowardly choice that was entirely in character with the man he had revealed himself to be. He left his keys on the kitchen counter with a note listing which items he had taken and which he was generously leaving for me. Telling friends and family about the divorce was another layer of pain. Most were shocked, having seen us as the perfect couple. James's parents called to express their sympathy while making it clear they would support their son regardless of the circumstances. We hope you will remain part of our lives, Eleanor said. Though we both knew that was unlikely, once James and Valerie had their baby, a grandchild, that would naturally take precedence over an ex-daughter-in-law. It was Michael who surprised me with his unconditional support. He called the day after James moved out. I heard what happened, where he said without preamble, "My brother is an idiot." His bluntness startled a laugh from me, the first genuine one in weeks. That seems to be the consensus. Are you okay? Do you need anything, though? He asked with sincere concern. I am surviving, I told him, one day at a time. If you need help with the divorce proceedings, I know a great lawyer, Michael offered. Or if you just need someone to talk to who knows what a selfish jerk James can be, I am available. His support was unexpected but deeply appreciated. Over the following weeks, as I navigated the practical aspects of ending a marriage, Michael checked in regularly. He was in town more often than usual, having temporarily relocated to Chicago to work on a book about Great Lakes conservation. We occasionally met for coffee, and I found talking to him surprisingly easy. Unlike his brother, Michael was an attentive listener who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. He shared stories about growing up with James that helped me understand my estranged husband better. James has always needed to be the golden boy, Michael explained during one of our conversations. It is exhausting for him always maintaining that perfect image, but he cannot help himself. And you? I asked. What role did you play in the family? Michael grinned. The perpetual disappointment. It is actually quite freeing once you embrace it. Through mutual friends, I heard that James and Valerie were already planning their new life together. They had purchased a luxury condo in the same River North building where I had seen them together. James was telling colleagues how excited he was about becoming a father, apparently unbothered by the circumstances. The news sent me into a tailspin. I spent a weekend in bed alternating between crying and sleeping. Dr. Marshall helped me work through the renewed grief, reminding me that healing is not linear. You will have setbacks, she assured me, but each one gets a little easier to recover from. She was right. I gradually began rebuilding my life without James. I redecorated our bedroom, purging it of memories. I accepted social invitations I would have declined while married. I focused on my business, which was thriving thanks to a feature in Architectural Digest. Slowly, I began to recognize myself again in the mirror, a woman with her own identity beyond James's wife. 2 months after James left, Michael invited me to lunch at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park. I noticed immediately that something was bothering him. His usual easy smile was absent, and he fidgeted with his napkin throughout our meal. Is everything okay? I finally asked as we waited for dessert. You seem distracted. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his brother that made my heart twinge. I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Just say it. He took a deep breath. Before Valerie started dating James, she and I had a brief thing. I stared at him, trying to process this information. A thing? You mean you dated? Not exactly dated, he clarified, looking uncomfortable. We met at a charity event where I was showing my photography. We hit it off, spent a weekend together, then I left for an assignment in Alaska. When I came back a month later, she was already working for James. Does James know about this? I asked. Michael shook his head. I do not think so. When I realized who she was, I kept my distance. It was awkward. but it had just been a casual thing. I figured it was best left in the past. Why are you telling me this now? Michael looked me directly in the eyes. Because of the timing, Adela. Valerie is supposedly 12 weeks pregnant now, but about 4 months ago when I calculate when she and I were together. The implication hit me like a thunderbolt. You think the baby might be yours, not James's? He nodded miserably. It is possible. I cannot stop thinking about it. We sat in stunned silence as the waitress delivered our desserts, neither of us making a move to touch them. What are you going to do? I finally asked. What should I do? He countered. If I am right, my brother is planning his life around a child that is not his. But if I am wrong and I say something, I destroy my relationship with him for nothing. It was a moral dilemma with no easy answer. The child deserved to know its true parentage, but the revelation would cause tremendous pain to everyone involved. We need to find out for certain, I said at last. Without confirmation, this is just speculation. How I cannot exactly ask Valerie for a paternity test. I considered the problem. We need DNA samples from both you and James to compare with the baby when it is born. That is months away, Michael pointed out. And how would we get James's DNA without him knowing? A plan began forming in my mind. Your parents are hosting a family dinner next month for your father's birthday, right? Would James and Valerie attend? Almost certainly. Why? Hair samples, drinking glasses, napkins, I explained. There are ways to collect DNA without someone knowing. Michael looked uncertain. Even if we get samples, where would we have them tested? This is not exactly a standard request. Leave that to me, I said, surprising myself with my determination. I have a client who works in biotech. She might know of private labs that can handle this discreetly. Over the next few days, Michael and I refined our plan. It felt strange to be conspiring with my soon-to-be ex-husband's brother, but I could not ignore the possibility that James was building his new life on a lie, just as our marriage had been built on deception. My client, Dr. Patel, was indeed able to recommend a private laboratory that could perform a paternity test with just DNA samples, no questions asked. The cost was substantial, but Michael insisted on paying for it. If I am right about this, it is my responsibility, he said. The waiting was excruciating. William Westbrook's birthday dinner was still 3 weeks away. During that time, I continued with divorce proceedings while secretly preparing for our DNA collection plan. I purchased sterile collection kits as instructed by the lab and practiced using them discreetly. Finally, the night of the dinner arrived. Eleanor had invited me, despite the pending divorce, likely out of a combination of politeness and genuine affection. We were family for 5 years, she said when I expressed surprise at the invitation. That does not simply disappear. I arrived early to help with preparations, an excuse that allowed me to place small collection bags in strategic locations around the house. Michael arrived shortly after, nodding slightly to indicate he was ready for his part in our plan. When James and Valerie arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. Valerie's pregnancy was now visibly showing, and she rested her hand protectively on her small bump as she greeted the family. James kept his arm around her possessively, his eyes occasionally flicking to me with a mixture of guilt and defiance. Throughout dinner, Michael and I executed our plan with careful precision. I collected James's water glass, when clearing the table, swapping it for a clean one. Michael managed to secure a few strands of his own hair from a brush in the guest bathroom. By the end of the evening, we had what we needed. The following day, we sent the samples to the lab with a substantial rush fee. They promised results within 10 business days. Those days stretched endlessly as Michael and I waited, both simultaneously dreading and hoping for confirmation of his suspicion. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was at my design studio. DNA analysis results, read the subject line. My hands trembled as I opened it. The scientific terminology was complex, but the conclusion was unmistakable. The 2 male DNA samples showed a brotherly relationship to each other, and only one of them could be the father of the child based on the DNA markers present in the prenatal blood sample we had obtained through Dr. Patel's connections. That potential father was Michael, not James. I called Michael immediately. "You need to see this," was all I could say. He came to my studio within the hour, his face pale as he read through the results. "I was right," he whispered. "The baby is mine." "What are you going to do?" I asked. Michael paced the room, running his hands through his hair in agitation. "I do not know. This changes everything, not just for me, but for James, for Valerie, for this child." We discussed the moral implications late into the night. Did Valerie know the truth? Had she deliberately deceived James? Or was she herself uncertain about the paternity, and most importantly, what was the right thing to do for the innocent child involved? "I want to be a father to my child," Michael said finally, "but I do not want to hurt my brother. James hurt both of us," I reminded him gently, "and he deserves to know the truth before he builds his life on a lie." After much deliberation, we decided the truth had to come out. The only question was how and when to reveal it. The perfect opportunity presented itself when Eleanor called to inform me that James and Valerie were hosting a dinner to announce their engagement and celebrate the pregnancy. "They specifically asked if you and Michael would attend," she said, sounding slightly uncomfortable. "James says he wants everyone to move forward positively." Translation: James wanted to parade his new perfect life in front of his ex-wife and show everyone how well things had worked out for him. It was exactly the kind of performance he excelled at. "I will be there," I assured Eleanor, a plan already forming in my mind. Michael and I agreed that this dinner would be the ideal setting to reveal the truth. All the key players would be present, and the subject of the baby would naturally be central to the conversation. I printed the DNA test results and placed them in an unmarked envelope. The dinner was held at an exclusive restaurant in the Gold Coast neighborhood in a private dining room with views of Lake Michigan. I dressed carefully in a sleek black dress that projected confidence rather than mourning. Michael met me at the entrance, looking equally polished, but visibly nervous. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we waited to be seated. "No," I admitted, "but I am sure the truth needs to come out." The hostess led us to the private room, where James's parents were already seated, along with two couples I recognized as close family friends. James and Valerie were standing near the window, his arm around her waist, both smiling radiantly as they greeted guests. Valerie's pregnancy was prominently displayed in a form-fitting designer maternity dress. James's smile faltered slightly when he saw us, but quickly reset into his perfect host expression. "Adela, Michael, thank you for coming. It means a lot to have family support during this special time." Tammy sent. The calculated graciousness made my skin crawl, but I returned his smile with equal insincerity. I would not have missed it. Throughout the appetizer course, James dominated the conversation with talk of their new condo, Valerie's comfortable pregnancy, and his recent promotion. Valerie occasionally touched her stomach lovingly while looking at James with what appeared to be genuine affection. I found myself wondering again if she knew the truth or if she was as deceived as he was. When the main course arrived, James stood and tapped his glass for attention. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. As you know, Valerie and I are expecting a little boy in just a few months." He placed his hand on her shoulder possessively. "We are also delighted to announce that we will be getting married in a small ceremony before the baby arrives." Congratulations echoed around the table. Eleanor wiped a tear from her eye while William nodded approvingly. James continued, his voice swelling with emotion that seemed genuine. "Finding Valerie has been the greatest blessing of my life. Sometimes the right person comes along at an unexpected time, but you just know they are meant for you." He looked down at her adoringly. "And now we are creating a family together. Everything happens for a reason." I felt Michael tense beside me. James raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings, to family, and to our son." As glasses clinked around the table, I quietly reached into my purse and removed the envelope containing the DNA test results. With a steady hand, I placed it on the table and slid it toward James. "What is this?" he asked, his perfect smile still in place, but confusion in his eyes. "Something you should see before you continue planning your perfect new family," I replied calmly. The room fell silent as James opened the envelope and began reading. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to disbelief. The color drained from his face as he looked up first at me, then at his brother. "What is this?" he repeated, his voice now a harsh whisper. Valerie reached for the papers. "James, what is wrong? What is it?" As she read, her face went white. Her eyes darted to Michael in horror before quickly looking away. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" James demanded, his carefully constructed composure crumbling. "It is a DNA test," I stated simply. "Michael is the father of Valerie's baby, not you." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor and William exchanged confused glances while the other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Valerie's hand shook as she set down the papers. "I can explain," she began, but James cut her off. "You knew Michael before me." His voice was dangerous quiet. She nodded reluctantly. "We met at a gallery showing, But it was just a weekend, nothing serious. When I started working for you, I had no idea you were brothers at first. And when you figured it out, James pressed. It was already over with Michael, she insisted. And you and I had connected so deeply. I never planned for any of this to happen. James turned to his brother. And you knew she was with me and said nothing. Michael met his gaze steadily. When I realized who she was, we were already keeping our distance. It was a brief thing that happened before you two got together. I had no reason to think the baby might be mine until I heard how far along she was. The implications suddenly seemed to hit James fully. So you deliberately got pregnant to trap me? He asked Valerie, his voice rising. Was I just a better prospect than my wildlife photographer brother? More money, better position. Valerie began to cry. No, it was not like that. I genuinely fell for you, James. When I found out I was pregnant, I assumed it was yours. We had been together for months by then. But you were not certain, but he pressed. You must have had doubts about the timing. Her silence was confirmation enough. James stood abruptly, throwing his napkin on the table. This dinner is over. Thank you all for coming to what turned out to be quite a revealing evening. He stormed out without another word, leaving Valerie sobbing at the table. The remaining guests sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Eleanor was the first to recover. I think we should give Valerie a moment, she said diplomatically, ushering the other guests toward the door. I rose to leave as well, catching Michael's eye. He nodded slightly, acknowledging that our task was complete. The truth was out for better or worse. What happened next would be up to James, Valerie, and Michael to determine. As I walked out of the restaurant into the cool Chicago evening, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a certain satisfaction in seeing James's perfect new life implode, revealing itself to be built on as many lies as our marriage had been. But there was also sadness for the innocent child caught in the middle of adult deceptions. What I felt most strongly, however, was freedom. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I had taken back control of my narrative and could now truly move forward. 1 year after the dramatic dinner revelation, I sat on the back deck of my redecorated brownstone, enjoying the warm spring sunshine. The past 12 months had been a journey of healing and rediscovery, painful at times, but ultimately transformative. The aftermath of the paternity revelation had been as chaotic as expected. James and Valerie's relationship imploded spectacularly that very night. According to Michael, James had refused to speak to either of them for months afterward, communicating only through lawyers. Valerie had reached out to Michael once the initial shock subsided, acknowledging that she had suspected the baby might be his, but had convinced herself otherwise. I wanted it to be James's, she admitted to him. I had fallen in love with him, and it would have been simpler, but I should have been honest from the beginning. Michael, after serious soul-searching, had decided to embrace his role as a father. He moved back to Chicago permanently, taking a position with a conservation organization that limited his international travel. He and Valerie were not romantically involved, but were developing a respectful co-parenting relationship. Their son Benjamin was now 4 months old, a healthy, happy baby with Michael's eyes and Valerie's fair coloring. Michael occasionally sent me photos, knowing I would appreciate seeing the child who had inadvertently changed all our lives. I felt no resentment toward the innocent baby, only a lingering sadness that I might never experience motherhood myself. James had moved across the country to San Francisco, accepting a position with a rival marketing firm. According to mutual friends, he rarely mentioned his time in Chicago or his brief relationship with Valerie. He had erased us from his narrative, just as he had tried to erase me from his life when he found Valerie. My divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, a surprisingly straightforward process once James realized that fighting me on the division of assets would only prolong his connection to a situation he wanted to forget. I kept the brownstone and a fair portion of our joint investments enough to ensure my financial security. Professionally, my interior design business was thriving. The personal upheaval had somehow translated into a creative renaissance, and my work had never been stronger or more sought after. I had recently hired 2 junior designers to help with the increasing client load and was considering expanding into commercial spaces. Eleanor and William had made efforts to maintain a relationship with me, occasionally inviting me to family events. It was awkward, but touched me that they still considered me part of their lives in some way. I suspected Eleanor still harbored hopes that James and I might reconcile someday, not fully understanding that some betrayals cannot be overcome. My relationship with Michael had evolved into a genuine friendship, based on mutual respect and the unique understanding that comes from shared trauma. We met for coffee every few weeks, our conversations ranging from his adventures in parenthood to my latest design projects. There was no romantic interest on either side, just the comfort of connection with someone who truly understood the journey I had been on. I had even met Valerie and Benjamin a few times initially at Michael's request. The first meeting had been tense, with Valerie clearly uncomfortable facing the woman whose marriage she had helped destroy. But over time, a cautious civility had developed. We would never be friends, but we could be in the same room without animosity. Dr. Marshall had helped me work through my complex feelings about infertility. There are many paths to motherhood, she reminded me during our sessions, and many fulfilling lives that do not include children. I was beginning to date again cautiously. A landscape architect I had collaborated with on a project had asked me to dinner, and we had been seeing each other casually for a few months. Brian was kind, thoughtful, and patient with my lingering trust issues. I did not know if our relationship would develop into something serious, but I was open to the possibility in a way I could not have imagined a year ago. The most profound change was within myself. The woman who had defined herself as James's wife and measured her worth by her ability to conceive was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more self-aware, and more compassionate, even toward herself. I had learned that betrayal, painful as it is, can sometimes be the catalyst for necessary change. James leaving me for Valerie had felt like the end of my world, but it had actually been the beginning of a truer, more authentic life. The truth about Valerie's baby had brought neither joy nor satisfaction, merely confirmation that deception eventually reveals itself. James had left me for a fantasy that proved as false as the persona he had cultivated. The karmic justice was not lost on me, but it brought less pleasure than I might have expected. What brought me peace was not revenge, but resilience. The discovery that I could lose what I thought was essential to my happiness and still find joy. The betrayal that had broken me had also rebuilt me stronger at the broken places. As I sipped my tea on the deck of the home that was now truly mine, I felt genuine gratitude for the painful journey that had led me here. Not because the pain itself was valuable, but because surviving it had revealed my own capacity for growth and renewal. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflections. It was probably Brian arriving for our planned visit to the botanical gardens. I smiled as I rose to answer it, looking forward rather than back, finally free of the past that had held me captive for too long. Have you ever discovered a shocking truth that completely changed how you saw someone you trusted? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength. Share this with someone who might need to hear that life does get better after heartbreak. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.